So, let me ask you a question right out of the gate. When you picture an insurance advisor or a financial planner, what instantly comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's that classic stereotype, right? The loud, aggressive salesperson pushing products with flashy pitches and totally manufactured urgency. Well, today we are going to completely shatter that stereotype. We're looking at a fascinating document that outlines a fundamentally different approach to influence and advisory roles. And the secret? It's not about volume, it's about depth.
Okay, let's dive into this. Having insurance and being protected aren't the same thing. This is absolutely the core misconception we need to unravel today. This industry is so often seen as just a machine that sells products, literally just pieces of paper that sit in a drawer somewhere. But true advisory work, it's actually about providing invisible, structural protection. It's about seamlessly aligning a policy with a person's actual life, their unique vulnerabilities, and their unseen risks.
So, to achieve that deep level of protection, the source introduces something called the triangle of influence. It's basically a strategic framework for shifting away from that performative salesmanship we just talked about and moving toward a quiet, ethics-driven authority. Genuine influence in this field isn't measured by how hard you hustle or how much you posture. Not at all. It is measured and deeply rooted in pattern recognition, strict ethical standards, and real lived experience.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly touch on the myth of persuasion, introduce the triangle framework, and then methodically unpack its three core pillars: likability, trust, and authority. Finally, we'll wrap up with a practical publishing cadence. Let's get right into it.
Pillar 1. Authentic likability. Or, as I like to think of it, humanity over hustle.
In the business world, likability is incredibly often confused with just wearing a fake smile to win everyone over, right? Try to be universally popular. But true likability actually comes from your humanity and your vulnerability. Take these examples. Choosing to move countries literally just to lower the temperature of your life, choosing calm over status. Or the quiet frustration of trying to warn people about financial mistakes way before they make them. Or even redefining what ambition means past retirement age. Sharing these highly personal, unglamorous truths is what humanizes the advisor. It grounds them in reality, rather than just performing some exhausted hustle culture script.
Moving on to Pillar 2, earning trust through transparency and ethics.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the contrast between two very different professional approaches. Trust is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but it is earned through deliberate decisions and a ton of unglamorous behind-the-scenes work. On one side, we have performative confidence, the quick answers, the strong opinions, the absolute zero hesitation. We are so conditioned to think that means competence. But on the other side, we have quiet authority. This actually involves hesitation. It involves verification and double-checking assumptions. True competence is actually a lot slower. A real professional hesitates because they truly understand the weight of the consequences.
And that brings us to a fundamental rule of earning trust: ethics over speed. Giving advice that seems simple on the surface actually requires a massive amount of unseen work. It's the researching, the scenario planning, poring over the fine print. Choosing honesty and accuracy, even when it literally slows a transaction down, is what demonstrates integrity in action. It completely reframes the advisor from just being a loud opinion giver to a careful, meticulous problem solver.
Which leads us to our final and deepest pillar. Pillar 3, quiet authority, insight, and judgment. Authority isn't established by talking the loudest. It's established by seeing the unseen risks that everyone else misses. Which brings us to a really provocative question. Why do people who need protection the most often value it the least? It's a harsh reality in the advisory world. We see lower-income individuals frequently resisting the preparation for risk. So why is that?
Well, it's not about a lack of intelligence or responsibility. Not at all. It is entirely about pressure. When money is tight, the risk feels like this abstract concept. It's way off in the distance. But the premium, the actual cost of that insurance, that is immediate. Constant financial strain means day-to-day survival absolutely has to take priority. Contingency planning just feels like a luxury they simply can't afford today, even though, ironically, they are the least equipped to handle a shock tomorrow.
This deep understanding of client realities really highlights a dangerous illusion: the huge difference between cover and protection. Look, a lot of people have cover, meaning a policy technically exists on paper somewhere, and because of that, they think they're safe. But protection means that policy actually aligns with their current life circumstances, their actual income, and their real risks. Planning for routine is easy, but true protection is about planning for disruption.
Let's move to and see how this built, because risk rarely arrives all at once, does it? Step 1.
a small health issue pops up. Step 2. Maybe a slight change in income. Step 3. You delay the paperwork thinking, oh, I'll just sort it later. But time is an active variable here. Step 4. Options silently narrow. By delaying decisions, you allow risk to compound until the decision is effectively made for you by your age and your health.
You know, the narrative we usually hear about financial ruin is super cinematic. Total loss, massive catastrophes. But the reality is that most risk isn't dramatic at all. It's totally mundane. It's an illness that limits your income temporarily. It's a partially covered claim because of an unnoticed exclusion buried in the fine print. It's administrative delays that wreck your cash flow. Real financial strain stacks up quietly, right there in the details.
I absolutely love this quote from the source material. Boring is a feature, not a bug. Let's be honest, financial planning and insurance are largely considered pretty boring topics. But the explainer makes a fantastic point here. When financial planning is doing its job perfectly, nothing dramatic happens. There are no crazy headlines. The fact that it's boring means your life hasn't been thrown into a massive crisis.
Real authority comes from finding value where others literally just see paperwork. The source shares this brilliant anecdote about an advisor reviewing a client's situation and finding an unseen, completely valid claim buried in their existing cover. The client had just accepted their situation as, one of those things you live with. But by connecting the dots that weren't obvious at all, the advisor secured a payout the client never expected. Now that is quiet authority in action.
Okay, so how do we do this? Putting it into practice. The simple publishing cadence.
So we understand the 3 pillars now: likability, trust, and authority. But how do you actually apply this framework sustainably over time? Let's walk through this super practical weekly rhythm. Early in the week, you focus on likability, maybe sharing a personal reflection or a lived experience just to open the door. Midweek, you shift to authority, offering a sharp insight or correcting a common misconception. Then, by the end of the week, you anchor it all with trust, discussing your values or your behind-the-scenes decision-making process. Influence builds so naturally this way: connection first, insight second, and belief reinforced.
Implementing this means waking up to what the job actually is. Products? Those are the easy part. They are structured, regulated, clearly defined. The hard part? The conversations. The real, genuine work lies in acting as a human translator for highly uncomfortable realities. It's navigating the vulnerability and uncertainty of talking about illness, income loss, and what actually happens when life goes totally off script.
So the crucial point is, good advice protects people from themselves and their optimism. Human beings are naturally optimistic, right? We always assume the best. We systematically underestimate risk. An advisor's ultimate job isn't to crush that optimism, but to actively support it by ensuring that a single unexpected event doesn't completely ruin what that optimism has built over a lifetime.
We've really covered how shifting from loud salesmanship to quiet authority fundamentally changes the value of an advisor. It transforms them from just a vendor into a true protector. So I'll leave you with this memorable final question to reflect on regarding your own vulnerability to risk. How many people out there are carrying cover they've never really understood? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it completely changes how you look at the unseen value of true advice.